Good morning and welcome to the Point. Beginning this week on our program and for the next several weeks, we'll be examining two special elections for state house seats that are open because of vacancies. We start in the 80th district. That's where Cindy Gamrat was expelled. There are 7 other Republicans and Gamrat running for that seat. The Democrat is running unopposed. You'll hear from him later in this show. But we start this morning with the first Republican running, Kevin Travis. Tell me what brings you into this race. We all know the circumstances, but why did you decide to get in this race?
Well, I really think that it was all about a different way of thinking as far as how Lansing should run. My education, I went to Western Michigan University, got a degree in education, and then I ended up working for a major pharmaceutical company in Allegan County as a continuous improvement engineer. So really process improvement in a way to analyze problems and make things run smoother. I think that's a different way of thinking that Allegan or Lansing needs that.
When you think about, by the way, a lot of people would probably agree with you that Lansing could find better ways to do things, but how would you go about achieving that? Because Lansing, all political bodies, are creatures of habit. There are bureaucrats who have been there. There are entrenched ideas and ways of doing things. There are rules. There are all that. What kind of change do you think you could affect that would be positive from a policy-making standpoint?
Well, one of them is to make it easier to start a business in the state. A good friend of mine, George, he tried to start a brewery up in Mackinac City. And he was just telling me the nightmare horror stories about the endless bureaucracy that he had to jump through in order to start a business. And there's no microbreweries up in Mackinac City. And he was just telling me all the regulatory hoops and all that kind of stuff that he had to jump through in order to get that business rolling. And there's absolutely demand for his business up there, a market need, and it's a shame that he couldn't get it done sooner. In fact, he ended up delaying the opening of his business by a couple of months because of some unforeseen regulatory issues. And if there was a way to streamline that process and really kind of a one point of contact that a person that hey, I want to start a business, who can I contact? And only one phone call instead of playing phone tag at the state level. We're trying to figure out what you need to do.
When you think about state government and the role there, you talk about regulation, something I hear a lot from people who are running for office. Talk about the size of state government. Is it the right size? Is it too big? Is it too small? What should it look like?
Well, it's compartmentalized, too siloed. I think there's a lot of non-communication going on between departments. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And if it's not that regulation is a bad thing, because there are legitimate public interests that need to be protected. It's just making sure that if you want to start a business, that you're dealing with one point of contact instead of having to deal with different parts of the regulatory system, the executive branch, that may have different interests than another part of the executive branch. How can we get goal alignment? I think that's one of the things Governor Snyder had talked about as far as making sure that we're all on the same page and eliminating barriers for people. Because really government, the role should be to help as much as possible and to get out of the way when it can.
This is an unusual race because of the circumstances I mentioned off the top, and it has brought out a lot of folks. Have you run for political office before?
This is my first time running for political office, but I've actually worked in local government for the past 2 years now.
When this race comes up, it comes up in November, and a whole lot of people aren't going to be paying attention to it because they're not expecting, first of all, they're not expecting an election in November, and this race wasn't scheduled. So what do you have to do to talk to the people in most, not quite all, but most of Allegan County in order to get them to be aware?
You know, the problem with Allegan County is that it's a massive county, and the population is spread out. We don't have one primate city, so for me it's a lot of word of mouth. Working at probably the county's largest employer for the past 10 years helps. So people that I've worked with and people that know me can attest to my character and say he's a good guy and he has different ways of thinking and can help out. Other than that, it's really just going to be going door to door in some of the communities that I'm familiar with. I know I don't have time to really hit the road and hit every small town and like that in the county, but I'll hit the ones that I can.
There are roughly 90,000 people in the district that you hope to represent. What is the biggest need that you think that they have?
Jobs. There's, without question, it's getting people employed, steady employment, and also another issue is access to mental health and job skills training. Currently I work at the county courthouse, which is kind of the triage center for mental health problems, and that in the county jail. And taxpayers don't realize that one of the biggest expenditures of any county is the county jail. And if we can reduce the jail population and the recidivism that occurs by getting people the help that they need, they're actually really going to save themselves money as far as where the tax dollars are going. And it's other than that, jobs and help like that. So
you bring up an interesting point, because the amount of people that we have incarcerated either at the city or county or state level is something that is currently under discussion, and we know that there are a lot of mental health issues that go along with that. Given the constraints that there are within the budget of the state of Michigan, how do you approach that problem without extra dollars?
You know, actually there's a budget proposal right now, or not a budget proposal, but a state ballot proposal regarding the legalization of marijuana. And I think that it's an opportunity right now for the state to jump on, to dedicate, if that passes. Right now in the state of Colorado, I believe it's $24 million that they've brought in as far as taxes go. And that's $24 million that's not going to drug cartels. But if we do get that revenue stream, what I would do is dedicate it to three things: roads, mental health, and job training.
As I said, there are a total of 8 Republicans that are running for the office in the 80th District. We continue our conversation now with another one of those Republicans, Jim Story. Let's start with your background, what you've done, where you've been, those kind of things, because while I'm sure a lot of people in Allegan County are familiar with you, some of our other audience may not be, and this is a chance to introduce yourself.
Well, I have been an Allegan County Commissioner for the last 3 years, representing a district around Holland and 3 adjacent townships. Before that, I was a Liquor Control Commissioner for the state of Michigan for 8 years, and before that, I did economic development for the state and for 2 energy companies. So I've had a mix of both private and public employment.
So you know what it's like to run for office. You've done that before. Did you run for state representative before?
I did 30 years ago when I lived in the Upper Peninsula. I finished a dazzling 6 out of 7. So I have run for office before, but I also have managed other people's campaigns. Most recently, Steve Schultz, who ran for this job in 2014, Marge Baker, who's our chief circuit court judge, and Roger Victory, who is a state representative from the Hudsonville area. So those are some of my campaigns.
So I'm always interested about how and why people get into the game of running for the State House of Representatives, because it is not an easy task to do. And so I'm particularly interested, as one who's seen it up close and personal, and you know what it's like. We know that there are unusual, I guess I would say, circumstances surrounding this particular race, with a November primary and a March general election. But beyond the opportunity, what makes you get involved?
Well, as you referenced, this is a historical opening. Only 4 legislators, 4 representatives in the more than 150-year history of the Michigan House of Representatives have been expelled from office. And so I think at this particular time, it's important to have a candidate who understands the process of legislating, understands the governing process, and who has done it successfully in other venues prior to this one. The people of Allegan County deserve a very strong, effective advocate. I've demonstrated that in a variety of community projects, in governmental projects, and in, frankly, private sector projects. And so I thought this was the right time, given the kind of the fallout on the county from the whole situation with our representative.
I ask you this because of your background, because you've been around this. In a multi-person primary, it makes it more difficult in many ways to get people to focus on particular candidates.
Yes.
So there are 8 people that are running as Republicans in this primary race. What do you do to set yourself apart?
Well, I think you have to, first of all, emphasize your record. I think also you have to focus on the people that you've already served, which I have in the immediate Holland and North Allegan area. And I think the third thing is you have to leverage the support of others who are in the day-to-day business of serving the people of Allegan County. I'm very proud to have the support of fellow county commissioners, the 2 preceding state representatives who had this seat before Ms. Gamrat had it, and several township supervisors. When you can leverage that support, that distinguishes you because they can vouch for your credibility.
Let's get down to what it is that needs to be done. What does Allegan County need? What does the state of Michigan need? And how can you provide that?
Well, kind of the first answer is both true for Allegan County and the state of Michigan. We need to restore respect for the office of state representative of the 80th district. You know, Allegan County is a very important county in the state's food processing and food production area, number 1 or number 2, depending upon the year in terms of agricultural production. It needs to be better served by a very strong voice that is heard, respected, and believed in Lansing. So that's number 1, and that's important not only to the state, but to the residents of Allegan County. You know, second, I think we need to focus on the less flashy parts of state government. You know, a lot of people run for a job, run for headlines, run for leading your news. You know, I'm running to be a servant of the people of Allegan County because I think state government needs some fine-tuning to be more efficient. And one of the less flashy jobs that a legislature needs to do, it hasn't done very effectively in my view, is oversight of state operations. Every year, one of the budget experts told me there's about $300 to $500 million of spillage, money that is either wasted or turned back that could have been go for important projects such as roads.
Well, let's talk about roads. If there is $300 to $500 million that is somehow unaccounted for or isn't properly used, that'd be about a third.
Right.
At best case, what needs to be done for roads. What is your take on roads? Because we know the legislature is considering, at least the conversation is, a mix of more revenues, perhaps $800 million or so, and some general fund, perhaps $400 million in general fund money. That's not a final plan, but that's part of what's being talked about.
Right.
How would you fix roads?
Well, first of all, the person who's elected to this job will not take office until the middle of March. If we have to go another 5-6 months waiting for a road package to go through, the people of this state would have a right to be very angry and create maybe a few more vacancies in the House of Representatives and the Senate. So I think it's the current legislator's job to get this process done and get the money flowing to our roads. But if when I'm elected and take office in March, if this is still unresolved, there are about 3 things that I would do. Number 1, I would go back to the people and say a very simple proposal. Dedicate the sales tax money that's paid by motorists at the pump to fixing roads. It's a truth and taxation issue with me. I think if you went to the local gas station and asked the average motorist, did you know that the money that you pay at the pump doesn't all go to the roads? They'd be shocked and appalled because they believe it does. And I think that's a deceptive practice by the state government that needs to be corrected. If we do that, estimates are anywhere from $500 to $600 million from what I've heard over the years. Second, I think we need to bring down the high cost of inflated labor on our roadways. I have a nephew who is in the road business. He says he has 2 sets of books. When he does private work, it's $13.50 an hour for a common laborer. When he does government work, it's $36 an hour. That extra amount of money could be spread into putting more pavement down and fixing more bridges. And then third, I think we need to look at tightening up the operations of the Department of Transportation itself. I've heard stories of them buying a railroad car for making expositions around the state. If we truly have a crisis in roads and infrastructure, we need to be laser focused on the operations of the Department of Transportation to put all that money there. So I think by the combination of those 3 things and the spillage factor that I mentioned earlier, I think you'll find enough to do the job.
Without revenues?
At this point, without revenues, yes.
Over the next few weeks, we'll try to talk to all of those Republican candidates, though one of them has already declined our request. I'll tell you who that was next week. But when we come back, there is a Democrat in the race too, unopposed in the primary, but he'll be around for the general election. You'll meet him next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. As I told you earlier in the program, we're taking the next few shows to look at two special elections for open house seats. In the 80th district, there are 8 Republicans that are running in a primary. The lone Democrat who is running and who will be on the general election ballot next year is David Gernandt. Tell me about yourself, where you have spent your career and your background, because this is, if I understand this right, in this area, your first foray into politics.
This is true. I am a local boy. I was born in Kalamazoo and attended public schools there, kindergarten through 12th grade. Graduated from Western Michigan University with high honors in political science with minors in history and philosophy and religion. Was one of the first 2 students from Western accepted at the Harvard Law School back in 1965. So this is the 50th anniversary of my college graduation. Shortly, I found my way out to Portland, Oregon within a couple of years. I did a couple of years working with the Interior Department in Washington, D.C. And in that capacity, I was detailed out to Portland to help on an Indian fishing rights case in the state of Washington. After I spent 6 months there, I went back to Washington, decided people really were different on the West Coast, and moved out there. And there I spent my career and got married. Children, I've got 2 grown sons with grown grandchildren, and served as a judge for 14 full-time years and 8 years part-time, both before and after full-time, in Multnomah County, which is the city of Portland, about 1.5 million inhabitants. And then retired in 2006 and decided 36 years in one place was maybe enough, so I moved to Washington, D.C. for a year and then found my way back home. Near home. I moved to Plainwell, found a Victorian house, and moved in.
When you think of that kind of a background, which is pretty extensive, and now you've decided to run for the Michigan State House of Representatives, what made you come to that decision to run? Obviously, this is an unusual case because of the expulsion of former Representative Gamrat, and we don't have to rehash that whole story.
Sure.
But nonetheless, it is a big decision when you decide to get into that political arena.
It's very big. I did not I did not move back to Michigan with the intention of getting into politics. I was looking for an anonymous, quiet retirement, which I've had. But you know, when this all started coming out in August, I thought, this is going to be a vacancy. For better or worse. Short campaign season. It's something I've always wanted to do since I was in high school. I was a high school geek and political junkie even then. And so I thought, you know, I can do this. And I can offer the people something that they haven't had before. Background as a judge and somebody not in politics, not a politician, who comes at issues with the open mind that I had as a judge and wanting to hear both sides of issues. I don't have an agenda. Some people want to run for office because they have specific things they want to do, or they come from a political background that tells them, you know, these are issues that I really want to get involved in. I don't have that. I want to do the best I can for the people of my county. Once I find what the issues are that people are interested in, and I've got 2 or 3, of course, that I want to talk about, but issues come up all the time that we don't expect after we're elected, and I think the people are entitled to have an honest view of various sides, and someone who can come to a conclusion, explain to the voters why I voted as I did, and hopefully do the best good for the most people.
You bring up an interesting point that I think is lost on some folks, and that is that no matter what the issues are that you're interested in, and we will talk about those, that once you are elected, you are confronted by issues you may have never even thought of before. Right. A $54 billion budget, that sounds like a lot of money, but the reality is the amount of that is disposable by the legislature is relatively small. So there are a lot of things to consider. So help me consider some of this with you. You obviously do have things you're interested in. What do you think are some of the real problems that face either Allegan County or the state or both?
Well, like everyone else, roads and bridges is a huge problem. And I grew up here in the 50s and we had the best roads in the country. And we don't anymore. We don't have a dedicated road fund, highway fund, as we did then. I understand even all of the gasoline taxes that ought to go to roads don't all go to roads, and that's the first thing to fix. I want to work with the other side to come up with solutions for a dedicated, sustainable fund that will be good on into the future, years that we can't predict right now. And it's going to take a lot of money. I understand $2 billion a year is what we need to maintain what we have. Well, what we have is not good enough. And if we can find some fat still in a lean budget, sure, go after some programs that maybe could be cut. I don't know what those would be. But once you've done that, I think the voters in polls and in local elections since the May election have shown that they're interested in fixing the roads, and they're willing to pay for it. I understand Grand Rapids and East Grand Rapids have passed millages which raise taxes on homeowners, and they're going directly to roads, and now you see the result all over the city. Some places you can hardly drive around because the roads are being fixed.
The issue of roads may
be fixed.
May be addressed by the time you get into office, if in fact you do. Beyond roads, when you look at the state or when you look at Allegan County and its particular set of needs, is there anything else that you would focus on?
Well, given my background, I've really been attracted to Governor Snyder's idea of reducing prison costs by reforming the criminal justice system, reforming sentencing. In Oregon, mandatory minimum sentences were passed, I believe, in 1994. They deprived judges of discretion and resulted in a massive increase in prison populations. We're putting a lot of people away who are no risk to anybody, except that they use drugs. And I think that's what the legislature and the governor are interested in getting at. A bill was passed in the House just last week with bipartisan support that addresses these issues.
What is the alternative then? Because you, coming from your unique perspective as a judge, if someone is breaking the law by using drugs, do you suggest that we decriminalize the act, or that we come up with an alternative punishment?
We can decriminalize, if it hasn't already been done, I don't know, the possession of marijuana, that sort of thing, and I understand issues of that sort will be on the ballot next year. I don't suggest decriminalizing the use of hard drugs, but people need treatment more than they need incarceration, typically. When I talked to my presiding judge once years ago about the drug laws, he said, if you could get judges to speak publicly about this, there's not a one of us who thinks these drug laws make any sense. And that's speaking from the standpoint of people who are heavily involved in enforcing the laws. I mean, if the laws are passed, we need to enforce them. But that has driven up prison populations in this country beyond anything the world has seen.
What is your general take, and I appreciate the fact that you haven't been observing the state legislature up close, but as somebody who lives here and you see the coverage, one of the things that I, as a reporter, often hear from people is about their dissatisfaction with the government and the way government functions. Now, much of that is reserved for the federal government, but even recent polling suggests that it has an impact, whether fair or not, on the way people perceive their state government as well. When you look at this government and the way it's functioning, is it providing the services and the kind of government that people should have in this state?
Well, it's amazing to me when the Republicans have complete control of both houses, really total control, and the governorship, that they cannot get things done. I mean, everyone knows the roads need repairs and we need to be building for the future. With one party in control, that's an ideal time for them to come up with solutions, and they haven't. It seems to be as dysfunctional as the federal legislature. I would like to, I don't know what one freshman legislator can do, but I would like to approach problems more openly, to work with the other side, to solve things, to bring rationality to bear. But with one party in control, things should be happening, and they're not. In Washington, we have a divided government, so it's a little bit more understandable that things don't happen as efficiently as they should. But in Lansing, my goodness, we should have an efficient government.
Over the next few weeks, we'll introduce you to the rest of those who are running in the 80th district to the degree that they will come in and talk with us. And we'll also take a look at a special election in Grand Rapids for a House seat. We'll be back with more To the Point in just a moment. The circumstances and the reasoning for the open seat in the 80th district make it a special election. As we talk to more candidates, we'll talk more about exactly what it means for Allegan County and for the State House. And we'll have that other special election preview coming up. Hope you'll join us every Sunday morning. To the Point.